The Unexpected Teacup. Once upon a time, there were two families who lived in a small valley in the sunny south. They were called the Camomiles and the Manger Lanes, and they were always arguing. This was because they lived in a small valley, and although it was in the sunny south, one side of the valley was usually sunnier than the other. Now, ordinarily this wouldn't have mattered, but the Camomiles and the Manger Lanes both grew tea. In fact, between them, they grew 58 different varieties of tea, all of which needed different amounts of sunlight to ripen. So the two families were always arguing over who had the right to plant their particular type of tea, where, and for how long. Families in the sunny south can be extremely large, and the Camomiles and the Manger Lanes were no exception. Don Camomile had 20 sons, each of whom had 10 children, who all grew up and had children of their own. Signora Manger Lane had 7 sons and 8 daughters, who all did the same. So the small valley was getting pretty crowded, and the arguments worse and worse. This wasn't helped by the fact that no Camomile ever married a Manger Lane, or the other way round. When it came for them to find partners, the young Camomiles and Manger Lanes set off for neighbouring valleys to court the sons and daughters of other families who grew things like cucumbers or curly kale, or even at a push, and only if they were desperate, coffee beans. Some of the daughters stayed in their new homes, but all the sons returned with their young brides, and the valley got fuller and fuller. Then, one day, something unexpected happened. Frida, the youngest daughter of one of the Manger Lane families, was invited to a tea dance in a valley close by, which was devoted to marrow growing. By some terrible mix-up, one of the Camomile boys, by the name of Diego, was invited too. During a short break between the tango and the foxtrot, Frida picked up her teacup and peered into it. She gave a small, ladylike gasp of surprise, for she quite unexpectedly discovered she could read the tea leaves at the bottom of the cup. They told her that she was to marry the next man who asked her to dance. At that moment, Diego Camomile tapped her politely on the shoulder and asked her to join him in the foxtrot, completely unaware that he was talking to a Manger Lane. They started talking about tea varieties and blends as they danced, and by the time the waltz came round and they discovered each other's surnames, it was already too late. They were madly in love. Of course, the two families were outraged when Diego and Frida announced their intention to marry, and they were forced to run away, aided by a kind explorer who listened to their story. With his help, they travelled to the bustling town of Harbour Heights, where they set up a tea-blending business. Everything went well until the day, years later, just before Phineas and Phillida Pepper were due to set off on a voyage for the frozen north. Frida Camomile picked up her teacup and peered into it. This time she let out a most unladylike shriek. Chapter 6. The Firefly Quarterly, page 17. Delicious at twice the price. The Quarterly is delighted to announce a generous donation from Bernard Bumble's Buns and Pies, and can confirm that this fine old firm's products are as delicious as ever, if not more so. Never fear, though, Mr. Bumble. The Quarterly will be watching and tasting to make sure your standards are maintained, along with those donations. Tap, tap, tap. The tall, thin figure of the lamplighter appeared at the top of Brimstone Alley and turned the corner into Firefly Square. He stopped by the lamppost outside Camomile and Camomile tea blenders and carefully lit the lamp before continuing on his way. Tap, tap, tap. "Good evening," said Hugo Pepper politely, raising his sou'wester. The lamplighter paused and regarded him with watery grey eyes for a moment. Then, without so much as a word of greeting or a nod of acknowledgement, he moved on. "Don't mind him, Hugo, dear," said Daisy Neptune as she swished past and rang the bell outside the tea blenders. "He never says a thing. We haven't heard him speak in all the years we've lived in Firefly Square," added Lily Neptune, swishing up behind. "Not once." The door of the tea blenders was opened by a plump, jolly-faced man. He had wavy grey hair, a little moustache, and, given the pudginess of his hands, curiously delicate fingers. "Why, if it isn't my favourite ladies of the sea," he beamed. Come in, you're just in time for tea." thank you, Diego. We've brought a young visitor with us, Phineas and Phillida's boy. Yes, Frida told me to expect you, my dear boy, said Diego Chamomile, taking Hugo's hand and giving it a vigorous shake. I'm delighted to meet you. Come in, come in. Hugo and the Neptune sisters followed Diego inside the shop, while he called excitedly to his wife. Stepping over the threshold, Hugo found himself on the landing of a wrought-iron spiral staircase that rose to the shop's rafters and descended to its basement. The inside of Chamomile and Chamomile was one big space into which were stacked tea chests that surrounded the spiral staircase from the bottom to the top. Light came in from a large skylight in the roof, through which Hugo could see the fading splendour of a golden sunset. Next to it was suspended a wooden cabin which Hugo supposed was the Chamomile's bedroom, while 3 non-existent floors down there was the orange glow of a small stove, and a round table set with tea things, and at the table was a pale, delicate-looking woman with grey hair and a kind face. They all descended the stairs to join her, Diego calling down as they went, "Frida, my love, he's here! Hugo Pepper's here, just like you said!" As Hugo Pepper climbed down the spiral staircase, he glanced at the labels stamped onto the stacked wooden tea chests he passed. Rumbly tummy, bad knee, heartburn. "Medicinal blends on this side," called Diego over his shoulder. Hugo nodded and turned the other way. "Happy, mild, merry, strong, weepy, moderate," he read. "Emotional teas on the other," Diego informed him. They reached the basement and joined Frida at the tea table. The tea chests surrounding them also had labels on them. "Near future, soon to pass, yet to be," they read, and "not for ages." "And these," said Diego proudly, "are the teas I blend especially for Frida." He took a tiny teapot from the stove, shook it gently, and poured its contents into his wife's teacup. "Fortune-telling tea." He turned to the stove and picked up another, far larger teapot and poured everyone else a cup, before producing a plate of small cakes which filled the room with a delicious, nutty, chocolatey, caramelly smell. "For the rest of us, Chamomile's special heartfelt welcome blend," he said. "And what better to go with it than Archduke Ferdinand's Florentines, fresh from the Fatal Voyage bakery?" He beamed happily as Hugo took one and tasted it. The Florentine was delicious. He took a sip of tea. It seemed to slip down his throat and spread a wonderful warm feeling through his chest. "Diego's teas are the finest in Harbour Heights," said Daisy, "but people just don't seem to want to buy them any more." "It's that nasty Firefly Quarterly saying horribly untrue things about them," said Lily fiercely. "About all of us who don't make donations," Daisy added bitterly. "Please, ladies, let's not burden poor Hugo with our problems," said Diego, trying to smile. "After all, the poor boy's parents were eaten by polar bears. Poor Phineas and Phillida." He shook his head. "And Frida tried so hard to warn them. She saw it all in the bottom of her teacup, didn't you, my dear?" But Mrs. Chamomile didn't answer her husband. She was too busy staring into her teacup, a trance-like expression on her face. "What is it, Frida, dear?" asked Daisy and Lily both together. "What do you see?" Frida peered closely into the teacup and spoke, her voice curiously high-pitched and warbly like a surprised quail. "I see a one-eyed giant," she trilled, her eyes fixed on the tea leaves at the bottom of the teacup, "staring at a one-eared cat, pointing the way to the seabed's treasure." "What does that mean?" asked Hugo, deeply impressed. Frida Chamomile put down her teacup and smiled brightly. "I've absolutely no idea," she said. "Now, would somebody care to pass me a Florentine?"
Shoulder bone shake hold and take hold. Somebody should take you home.